start. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here today. It lets me do one thing that I love, and that is complain about things. And the title of this conversation is really cognitive debt and the fact that it's a doubtful guest. And what do I mean by that? Try to click. So I've been in basically the ground zero of the formation of 4 companies throughout the years. One of them, Imperva, 2002, Incapsula, 2009, Keynote Networks, 2015, and this year, Cortanix. And every time you go back to ground zero, it's a great opportunity to think about what's different this time. And it's been actually an amazing journey thinking about the productivity boosts that you got along the way. Think about it. In 2002, we had some amazing new things going on. It seems very simple now, but if you think about it, it was like the time when you suddenly were able to use open source. You had technologies like Java, in which you could import other people's code that actually use it, which is amazing. And you had Google to search for all those things. So it's a great productivity boost. Moving onwards, in 2009, just before starting Incapsula, I saw this presentation. Anyone recognize the people in this presentation? It's too old. Alspo and Hammond. Now, these are people who came into Velocity in 2009 and just blew our minds away. They were talking about 10 deployments a day at Flickr. We were doing 5 deployments a year at the time. So the cloud really revolutionized and made everything much, much faster, much more productive. And it was amazing. And of course, Incapsula was a SaaS company, and you had GitHub. And throughout the years, I also added Docker here, mostly for compassionate reasons. And now, 2022, we have ChatGPT, OpenAI, Claude, Copilot. By the way, just raise your hands. Who is using daily Copilot, ChatGPT? Lots of people. And if you had to measure it, how much gain in productivity would you say it gives you? Like 1 time, 2 times, 3 times? Raise your hands, like what your sense is. Yeah, I see lots of fingers. And it's amazing. The productivity gain that a person gets from these technologies is something around like 3 times. By the way, organizations get a much harder job at it. They don't improve that much because of these technologies. And actually, if you think about like the whole gap here in the years, there's one technology that I haven't put here, right? Anyone think what is the missing technology that I haven't put here? Kubernetes. And I actually did not add it on purpose. And not only did I not add it on purpose, I'm actually not using it at Cortanix and will delay using it as long as I can. So the reason is that Kubernetes, though it is a very capable piece of software, also offsets a lot of the productivity that it gives by adding more complexity to your organization. And actually, to be fair, I think Kubernetes is probably one of the most over-engineered pieces of code in living memory. If you have to find something as over-engineered as Kubernetes, I'd go back to as far as either OpenStack or maybe Enterprise Java Beans 2.1, for those who remember. It's a piece of over-engineered code. And that is what I want to talk about today, which is basically the fact that, no, this is wrong, that cognitive debt is the reason that Kubernetes is offsetting your productivity. And let me just define, don't Google it, it's not a common term. What is cognitive debt? Well, cognitive debt is the complexity that you bring into your organization, that you actually invite into your own organization, and it's usually by trying to actually reduce technical debt, making the right choice. So it's something where you invite something into your organization and the complexity kills your productivity. And it's not just Kubernetes, it's a lot of technologies, it could be other things. But this is what kills the productivity of entire organizations versus like the gains that you get from things like ChatGPT, etc. And I know, this is a bit contentious, but let me explain how it starts and how it sort of creeps into your organization. It actually starts by trying to do the right thing. So we are thinking, okay, we have a problem. Let's introduce technology X. It has so many features that we can get for free, right? It will allow us to scale, right? And it's an industry standard. It's the cutting edge of how things should be done. It's also Hachana lemazgan, has so many of those. I don't know what's the translation for Hachana lemazgan in English. A preparation for an air conditioning? I don't know. But this is something purely Hebrew, and maybe global warming will take care of. But we also think about it as something that will reduce technical debt in the long term, right? We think about, we do the right thing by introducing this guest into our technology, and people will already know this technology coming in. And actually, there are two things that I haven't written, and that is, something that we don't say. It also says maybe our capabilities will be more marketable. It will look good on our CV to have this technology. And also, maybe like people coming into the organization, have you ever been in the situation where you say, yeah, we've been using OpenJunk since beta, and people will want to come on board because we have like cool technology that we use. And so we introduced this technology in, right? And we discovered that there's a steep learning curve. It's not as simple as it should be, maybe, right? It actually requires us to understand its limitations. So we discovered that we require expertise, and we have to learn using this technology. And it's actually not using the technology. We also discovered that, well, how should I put it? We are the plugin in this environment. We have to adjust ourselves to the technology rather than the technology to serve us, right? We figure out that we're not, the technology is not revolving around us, but we are revolving around it. In fact, it's a bit like the story about the guy, walking into the doctor's office with a frog in his head, and the doctor says, what seems to be the problem? And the frog says, I don't know, I have something strange growing out of my ass. And you suddenly fear that you are, the person under the frog, and the frog is the technology. We also discovered that sometimes, I don't know if you had this, when you bring on board a complex technology, sometimes simple things become very complex. Have you had this discussion where someone explained to you that 1 and plus 1 is very, very complex because of metrics and ways and mantissa and all sorts of things that are very, very complex coming out of like transactions and distributed, and suddenly you realize that simple things can be very complex in this new technology. One other thing that's very famous about Kubernetes is that it brings all its friends with, because it's so complex to use. You cannot use it by itself. You need Helm to operate Kubernetes. You need Istio to manage the microservices. So all this, cadre of new technology all come live with you now. And you all have to be experts on those underlying technologies. And that's something that you have and you will pay and you will continue to work with. It's also a part of every design. I mean, technologies that are complex tend to be involving of everything that you do. Every time that you work with the guests, you have to think about whether they're happy about it, whether they'll accept it, is it the right way to work with them? They're present in every design, and that's why you have your own experts in the organization that know how to talk with the guests, they know how to reason with it. And eventually, they'll become the bottleneck in the organization. Who knows how to configure it this way and that? Okay, that's a cue there. Next, you have the fact that you build your own wrappers in the organization to make things easier, because the people who are the experts don't want to be the bottlenecks anymore, so they build their own wrappers around a technology. and then you have something that's not standard anymore. It's different now. Every organization now has their own wrapper, and how things are done in this organization becomes different from how it is supposed to be done generally. So that is cognitive debt. That is how cognitive debt goes into your organization. And I'm not saying that cognitive debt is bad. The same way I'm not saying that technical debt is bad. It's just a matter of preferences. You may need, for example, to buy or to sign off on a mortgage, right? And you take on debt when you do that. But you better make sure that you know how to pay the price for that. And you better make sure that you get an apartment in the end of that. So it's just a matter of making the decisions and making the trade-offs and understanding that there is such a thing that is opposed to technical debt, and that is the cognitive debt that you bring in. I'll give some example. My favorite is, and I know it's not that popular, Kubernetes. Kubernetes has lots of capabilities and is a good technology, but are you willing and do you need to pay that debt right now? Are there more lightweight solutions that you can have? You could do Docker. My preference would be today bare metal. You have techniques and capabilities that allow you to do lots of other things. This is something probably, anyone here uses Rust on the day-to-day? Yeah, my sympathies. So maybe you need the performance and the efficiency and the stability of Rust. But what you get is also cognitive debt with it, because you have consideration of every damn pointer and who owns it and what happens there, and you're also thinking constantly about like the immense syntax, etc. There are other languages that fall less on the cognitive debt and don't draw so much attention to themselves and do not put themselves in the center of what you're doing. Another example would be adopting microservices. Microservices are complex, right? I think that there's been talk, throughout the last few months about microservices being technical debt. Well, they're not technical debt, they're cognitive debt. Once you put that technology in, you basically need to realize that you're bringing on more complexity. Now, the number one reason, or the important reason that's good enough for bringing in microservices would be to prevent teams from shooting each other in the foot. Preventing, different teams from messing with each other's code, that is a good reason for doing microservices. Do you need it right now? Because there is complexity involved in it. And complexity will slow you down. And that's really the trade-off, because monoliths get a bad rap, but for small times, they might be simple enough to make you productive. Another example would be React versus Angular. Angular provides lots of things, lots of capabilities, and a whole framework, but with it comes the need to know everything about it and having everything play with it. React, on the other hand, much more focused on doing one thing and one thing right, and therefore produces less cognitive debt. And one other thing, you get a lot of benefit from open telemetry, you get vendor agnostic, etc., but you do have to admire how over-engineered that piece of code is and how complex it makes everything versus things like Prometheus. So basically, if you think about it, you have trade-offs that you can make. You don't need to take on, you don't need to invite this doubtful guest every time. You need to make decisions on where you should put them in and where you should choose something that's more lightweight and easier to work with. Okay? And I want to offer some tool or an easy way of thinking about, how to make sure that the guest that you're inviting is actually a doubtful guest and introduces cognitive debt versus not. So confront them, ask the right question. And the most important question that you probably can ask about the new framework is, are you a framework or a library? And the answer pretty much is that libraries tend to be low friction. So they do one thing well. They are point solutions by nature, and they are easily wrapped. And also, they're easily replaced by something equivalent. So you can replace one queue with another. You can replace one database with another. This is not a framework. A framework is something that does many, many things and has an own ecosystem. It's something that you have learning curve, and really by learning curve, it means you have to adjust yourself to it, and of course, it is impossible to replace. That's a decision that you have to make early on, as you're told. So libraries are the opposite of frameworks, and usually frameworks come with cognitive debt associated. They're like the guest that you're inviting in. Going back to sort of like ground zero again, starting a new company, thinking about what are design principles, how do we work in order to make things productive? So I guess it's a truism to say, to be productive, you need to keep things as simple as possible. Simple equals productive. And here are 3 ideas and ways of thinking about your operation, like your day-to-day working with code and working with your environment, that will help you be more productive and direct your company, your new company, into more productive directions, at least from my experience. One thing that you have to ask yourself constantly is how good my feedback loop is. And by feedback loop, I don't necessarily mean like, interaction with customers and interaction with, I'm talking about like the day-to-day feedback loop that you get every time you compile code. If your compilation time is slow, your feedback loop is slower. If you have to, it's a true story. If you go to, companies and see people wandering around, it's because they were compiling or something and they went to make coffee because it took so long, and now they're sort of lost on the way back to their seats, waiting for the compilation to go back. So every time that you lose a second on when you want to change something until it's running again, that's a feedback loop that you lose. And it could be compilation time, it could be the time to log into the system, it could be the time to deploy. Think about what's the turnaround time for every correction of every mistake for every person in your organization. That's incredibly important, not just because it's more productive. You don't just get the extra 1 minute or 2 minutes. You get the reduction in distraction. You get the way to be productive by adding simplicity. The other question is, and again, it might be a rant around Kubernetes, but also how different is your production environment from your development environment, from your dev, like your personal computer? How many of you are running, maybe we'll do it to show, how many people are running on their own machine or on their dev environment, something that's very, very similar to what's happening in production? Not that many people. How many people are running on their own machine, something that's similar to what's happening in production? Even less. So the thing is, so if your production environment is very different from what you're running, then there you have a problem. There is a discrepancy, and that means that somewhere there is more complexity. And which brings me to the last thing. Are you able to be productive on a plane to Alaska? That means, is your turnaround time something that you're able to actually produce on a single computer, to reproduce something that's very similar to your deployment environment and to the way that you actually run the system, but do it as locally as possible? That's a challenge, isn't it? What about the databases? What about all the external dependencies? If you're able to be productive on a plane to Alaska, then your turnaround time is fast, which brings us back to the first thing. Your feedback loop is very, very fast. It means you're productive. And these are the things that you need to make sure are available, because there are all sorts of tools as we started this conversation, there are all sorts of tools that make you so much more efficient. You can ask ChatGPT to write functions for you. You can ask a lot. The question is, what's the turnaround time? Are you able to leverage it? And are you able to ask the right question from your LLM that will be effective in your organization? Because the two things that will kill you is, one, if your feedback loop is slow and you're not able to put into effect what ChatGPT is offering you, or your organization is too complex and ChatGPT has no idea how complex it is to calculate 1 + 1 and actually deliver a solution. And that's something that you need to take care of and make sure that you do not invite the doubtful guess early on in your company, because once it's there, it will not go away by itself. So that's basically what I had to say and what I had to talk about. If there are questions, I don't think we are equipped for that, but I'll be around. Hopefully, I had a chance to complain about the things that I hate about the world, and maybe there's some grain of insight about, the relation between complexity and productivity. Anyone wants to ask a question, by the way? Yeah.
You showed us multi-slide. You had a slide with multiple horizontal lines with orange dots.
Yeah.
The orange dots are your preferences?
I think it's sort of a reference to the question of where you are in the complexity versus...
Can we go back to that slide?
I don't think it's that...
the other clicker.
Yeah.
Click the other way.
Yeah. אחורה זה זה? That's it? Yeah.
Right, it starts over.
We're sort of replaying the entire presentation, which is great. If anyone forgot something, that's the time to actually
Second chance, yeah.
get a second chance. Yeah.
Yeah, this one. Go on.
Yeah. So Docker,
So the orange dots are your preferences?
I think it's more of an abstract notion that says there's a line. When you introduce any technology, it brings in some cognitive debt. There's even using Docker, for example, there is some cognitive debt associated with that. The thing is, it's usually a spectrum between, on the right is the heavyweights, on the left...
is clear. The question is personal. Are the orange dots your preferences?
No, it's actually semi-random.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And by
It's
the
more
way,
in the apps.
הכנה למזגן is future compatibility.
As future?
Future compatibility.
Thank you.
It's very rare that we have someone as awesome as Gur willing to answer some questions. So any more questions for this exceptional person? More clicks. Everybody loved this slide.
Yeah. Who agrees about React,
Yes.
Angular? Anyone here thinking about stopping using Kubernetes? Or not starting to use Kubernetes?
Yes.
Okay. Cool. Anyway, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.